All right, Chad, if you'd like to start us off.
Absolutely. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for our October 1st Thursday's webinar. My name is Chad Smith, and I'm the CEO of New Mexico Farm and Livestock Bureau. We're a membership organization that advocates for our state's agricultural families to ensure a successful future for food production in New Mexico. We're excited about Kevin Cray and Matt Hargarten with the Coalition for Community Solar Access. Our Director of Government Affairs, Tiffany Rivera, will explain a little bit about how community solar would benefit our state's farm, ranch, and dairy families. Thank you all again, and Tiffany?
Thanks, Chad. For farmers and ranchers in New Mexico, community solar represents a tremendous opportunity as landowners lease a small portion of their land for placement of solar panels. Numerous farm bureaus across the U.S. support community solar legislation to give farmers in the state additional revenue opportunities. In New Mexico, the state legislature could be considering community solar legislation in the upcoming legislative session. So thank you again to Kevin and Matt for joining us today and explaining community solar a little bit more.
Thanks, Tiffany. My pleasure to be here, and really happy to have Matt with me as well. I'll go ahead and share my screen. You might need to let me share my screen. Here we go. You want to take us away, Matt?
Sounds good. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having us here today. I'm sporting my community solar garden background here, so that you can see kind of what a little bit sort of get an idea of what a community solar garden looks like. But we will be showing some photos and some videos as well. Like Kevin said, we're really happy to be here. We're going to break this presentation into two parts. The first part is we'll tell you a little bit about us and just give you the 101 on community solar. What is it? How does it work? And sort of why is it proliferating around the country? And then we'll show a little video, and we'll hope that we don't have technical difficulties, but we will also trust that the folks at the Farm and Livestock Bureau will share the link out so that people can watch it on their own accord. And then the second half of the presentation, we'll have Kevin talk about what's in it for New Mexico and what's in it for farmers, and why you should care about this issue. And then we'll have a little bit of a discussion at the end around what can we do together to make this a reality. So first, we're both from the Coalition for Community Solar Access. We're a coalition of businesses and nonprofits working to expand access to solar through community solar. We're essentially a trade association. We represent developers, but we also represent other nonprofits such as Vote Solar and Solar United Neighbors and others who are looking to expand community solar. Our mission is to empower everyone, every consumer, every business with the option to choose solar. Right now, which we'll talk about, only a few people have that choice. And we work with customers, utilities, stakeholders, policymakers to develop and implement policies and best practices to ensure that community solar programs can proliferate and everyone can win from them. Next slide. So we'll just do a little bit. I'm sure a lot of you know probably more than I do about solar, but we'll kind of give you a little snapshot of solar and where we fit into the ecosystem. So really there are about three types of solar. There's rooftop solar. This is the stuff that sort of started the game. It's the type of solar that most people are familiar with. Your neighbor, you or your neighbor might have this on your roof. It's a single panel system, or I should say it's a single unit system that is fixated on either a commercial property or a rooftop, and it supplies solar to that customer. And then the rest goes to the grid. Again, very common. This has been a high growth area of solar. The second area of solar are utility scale solar projects. These are large installations, typically over 25 megawatts, sometimes a lot more. And they're usually on large swaths of land, anywhere from 50 to 250 acres of land. These are run by utilities and they service lots of customers. And then there's the third type, which is what we represent, and that's community solar. So it's somewhere in the middle between rooftop and utility scale. So these are, this is the fastest growing segment within solar. Actually, go to the next slide, Kevin, and I'll explain a little bit more about community solar. So these are, oh, actually, go one back. We'll talk about that in a second. So community solar are small solar arrays that are located off-site, so not on a roof, or located at a third-party site off-site, and multiple subscribers in the community subscribe to it. They're often smaller installations, and like I said, multiple residential and business customers can subscribe. Next slide. So the reason that community solar exists really is because, for the most part, most Americans cannot access rooftop solar. And in fact, over 75% of them cannot access rooftop solar. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, there's about 116 million US households. And so when you start to chop it down into who's eligible, you start to see where we get to 75% can't access it. You have to own your home to access rooftop solar. Only 77 million Americans own their home. You have to have a state that allows rooftop solar and then allows it to be sold back to the grid. So that reduces the pie even more. You need to have a sufficient credit score to finance solar panels, because they're usually financed over a period of time. So they'll give you the solar panel and then they'll finance it over time. And to do that, you need to have money and you need to have credit scores. And then you also have to have a roof that can handle rooftop solar. So it's got to be situated the right way. It's got to be created with certain codes. And so when you start to do the math, like I said, you get to this notion of over 75% can't access rooftop solar. So enter community solar. Next slide. We sort of talked about this already, but the way it works is these solar panels are located on a third-party site, usually on farm fields or other brownfield developments, like some of them are located in areas that used to be dumps and other places, other plots of land. The developers put these arrays up. They go and talk to customers. These customers can be anywhere from just a house that lives in the neighborhood, or a neighborhood school, or a nonprofit, or a business, and they subscribe to the amount of solar at the site, and then they get a credit on their bills, and it saves them money. The unique thing about community solar is community solar gets guaranteed bill savings, upwards of 10 to 15% savings on your bill. These projects are small. They're typically 2 to 5 megawatts, and they are connected to the distribution system. So they're created, and then it goes into the distribution system, and then you get a credit. Next slide. So what are the benefits of community solar? Well, there's a lot of them, and these are similar benefits that you get to any small, local, distributed energy source. The first one's lower energy bills. Like I said, community solar, it guarantees bill savings. So you're saving up to 10%, up to 10 to 15% on your bills, and you do that on day one with no money down. So it's a really great way for customers to save money. It creates local job creation and economic impact. Because these projects are smaller, they're located throughout a state. And so multiple communities, multiple counties can benefit from the economic development that these solar arrays create. Kevin's going to talk more about that here in a minute, but it creates a lot of jobs, and it creates a lot of tax revenue, and it creates a lot of economic impact in the communities. It also reduces the cost of the grid. We won't get into a science class here today, but by creating small distributed sources of generation, you can defer some of the building of a grid that costs a lot of money, and you can defer transmission and distribution, the sort of building of poles and wires because you're putting the electricity closer to customers. So you can actually reduce the cost of the grid. You create a more resilient grid. If you have a big fire in California or a tornado or a hurricane that can take out a large piece of infrastructure, lots of customers will lose power. But when you have a distributed grid, it becomes more resilient because you have to take out all of the power plants, not just the one. Innovation, it creates innovation and better customer programs because you're bringing in third-party competition, and it creates more equitable participation. So anyone anyone is allowed to participate in the community solar program. You don't have to own your home. You don't have to have a good credit score. All you have to do is have an electricity bill. Next slide. I thought it might be helpful to see what a community solar facility looks like from the air. So I've got two pictures that I'll show you. And then, like I said, we'll watch a video here in a second. But this is a sort of a typical community solar facility. This one is located on a farm in Maryland. It's 1.27 megawatts of electricity that's produced at this facility. And it's on 7 acres of land. So this landowner, worked with a developer to develop one parcel of his or her land, and it doesn't take up their whole land. It just takes up this one part. One of the great things about community solar is these developers use local labor and subcontractors, and on this one they vowed to only use that. And they actually donated $90,000 to charities and organizations in their neighborhood. Lots of community solar programs do something for the community. Some of them do art installations, others do donations, but oftentimes they want to do something to sort of introduce themselves to the communities that they're in. Next slide. Here's another picture of a facility. This one is not on a farm. But you can see it's attached to this is actually a school. This is in Massachusetts. It's 1.3 megawatts. It's on 7 acres of land. That's approximately 3,500 solar panels. And they've got enough electricity to power 150 homes. So again, homes in this area, businesses in this area can subscribe, reduce their bills, and then they get to be a part of creating renewable energy. Next slide. Because of all the benefits that community solar is sort of creates, and because of the push for clean energy, it's no surprise that community solar is growing. It's actually the fastest growing segment within the solar industry, and solar is the fastest growing segment within overall energy. And so right now, community solar is on pace to reach 7 gigawatts of capacity on the ground by 2025, but there are some projections that sees explosive growth as more and more states enable it. And we'll talk about how you enable community solar, but it's not even legal in every state. So the more and more opening of markets we do, the bigger and bigger the opportunity gets. Next slide. Like I said, selling power to multiple people is illegal in most states. And so the only way to enable community solar is through a legislative vehicle. It could be either a bill passed through legislation, or the commissioners, the Public Utilities Commission could create a program. Generally, they'll only do that if they've been told by the legislature to do so. So community solar there is policy in 19 states, plus the District of Columbia. This is really over the last 5 years that this has proliferated. 80% of the actual capacity of community solar is developed in states with policies. So there are other places that have community solar, either through co-ops or through a utility, but it's very rare. And it's a pretty small slice of the pie. So you can see more and more states are coming on board every single year. Next slide. So we could sit here and tell you about community solar until we're blue in the face, but I think the best way to see community solar and to feel community solar is through video. So we recently created a video with some farmers in Maryland who passed legislation last year, and they talk about why they chose to use some of their land for community solar. So Kevin's going to show that. Like I said, we hope the audio is good, and if it's not, we'll have a link available to you.
Generating cleaner electricity, it can't just be something for upper and upper middle class people to participate in. What it needs to be is something that the entire community can participate in. By doing community solar, you can lower the access point for people, make it easier for people to get into the game, and effectively expand the market for people who are looking to purchase solar.
Hey, Kevin, you want to hit pause? I think the video is not showing. Whatever you did there just actually took the video off. There it is.
There we go. Sorry about that.
Neighbors or the community in general in that area. This is on, for example, 18 acres of land, and it's providing over 400 customers in the area with power. These are homeowners that historically have not been able to put solar on their own home, and it now gives them access to renewable energy. They can go out, they can drive past a solar array and say, I'm part of that solar array, and I subscribe to it.
The beneficial element of community solar is that I get to be part of helping to produce renewable energy as well as get a nice return from that renewable energy. And all I have to do is say, here, you can lease this land. So it's a very seamless process from that perspective for me as a farmer. Is that all I got to do is deposit my rent check, and aside from that, everything else is taken care of. It's a very easy to manage diversification.
Renewable energy should be accessible and available to everyone. So by having community solar in your community, everyone in that community has access to renewable energy. So this Chesterwood site does about 400 single home families, small businesses, nonprofits, anyone that's connected to the local grid near our area right now. Every single site is built project specific. So there's a geotechnical study analysis done prior to building that we share with all of the parties that have a stake in the project, both the landowner as well as the county, state, and local level. This particular site has one central inverter, and so all of the combiner boxes for this site get routed to that inverter, and that's where it converts the DC into AC power, which then backfeeds into the grid.
One of the benefits of community solar is it works well with these farms in the sense that we're not taking up the entire farm. They typically range from, call it 5 acres to 25 acres. So it's just a portion of the property. When we go in and we install the project, we're driving posts into the ground. When you drive these posts in the ground, then you have a lease for 3 years, 25 years. And at the end of that time period, the system is removed and the site is restored back to its original condition. So in essence, this is really a temporary structure that allows the land to regenerate and be restored during this time period. So the landowner will then be able to not only have additional streams of income, but also the ground will be put back to its original state at the end of the lease.
This particular farm has been in our family for 86 years. I'm third generation. My son is fourth generation, and my grandson would now be the fifth generation on the farm. My sister and I both love the farm. We knew it's in our blood, and our blood, sweat, and tears within the farm. We wanted to keep it. So we have to supplement and do what we can to sustain it. That's where solar for us is a way for us to be able to hopefully send it to the sixth generation one day. It's enough that it could, for generations to come, keep the farm in the family if the kids so want it.
So I'm the fourth generation farmer here. We have about 500 cows on this site, and then we also farm about 725 acres of crop ground, primarily corn, soybeans. When you're dealing with agriculture, your product is a commodity. You know, it's kind of an ideal situation for me to have a locked in inflation-adjusted return per acre that I know works in my budget. The ability to give up a small portion of my land and diversify and get a better return for that land than I can out of the crops that I'm generating helps to kind of buoy my risk that I have in the agricultural commodity markets and allow me to have a subset of funds that I know is consistent and I know it's coming think it's important for us as a community, as a state, as a nation, to be giving people more opportunities to buy clean energy, not less. It's important to me because I represent a district that looks like this, that has a lot of row houses, that has a lot of people who live right next to each other. So with community solar, it allows them to get into the game and in essence generate their own electricity. This is where we really can open the door to thousands of people engaging.
My whole personal convictions, my personal faith life, and what I try and do in my life is value other people above myself. So that's one of the nice things about this community solar. That's one little way that I can know that I'm kind of giving back by providing a land that can produce energy that can help those people have access to that energy that they otherwise wouldn't have access to.
There ain't a bit of farming you can't do without the sun. I don't care whether it's raising livestock, it still needs the sun to grow the crops for the food and nutrition for the animals to eat. The sun is an intimate part of farming. Why not farm the sun and have that solar help the farm?
Great. I hope folks were able to follow along. A little bit choppy, but I saw Delene did put the link in the chat function, and I'm hoping that we're going to be publishing an article as well, and we'll make sure that that gets included in the article. But would highly recommend folks check that out when you have some spare time. So I'm going to hand it over to Kevin, and Kevin's going to walk us through kind of what's at stake for New Mexico and why farmers are increasingly choosing community solar.
Thanks, Matt. Can you guys still hear me okay? Excellent. So yeah, I'd like to jump into a little bit of the kind of economic opportunity for New Mexico. This is a study that CCSA helped Vote Solar put together for our legislative push last year, and just kind of gives a little example of what types of opportunities might come from enabling community solar in New Mexico. Our estimates show that, you know, about 375 megawatts of community solar could serve upwards to almost 22,000 customers, bringing access to many New Mexicans that don't otherwise have access. Additionally, there'd be a 33% increase in solar jobs with, you know, 822 sustained full-time jobs during construction and 20 full-time jobs associated with operations and maintenance. This is not taking into account all the ancillary jobs that would also be supporting the industry, things like engineering, financing, sales, marketing, surveying, and land people. And on the land people point, I think that's a great opportunity for farmers to get further engaged. No one has a better set of contacts within the landowner and farming community than the farmers themselves. And so there's an immense opportunity for them to support the community solar industry and even, you know, become a member of some of these companies or a contractor for some of these companies. I know of the Kaler family in Minnesota really embraced community solar when that program opened, and now they have a thriving community solar business that's looking to expand into other markets. Additionally, there are opportunities for farmers just like them to start the similar types of ventures here in New Mexico. Additionally, these are the types of jobs that tend to appeal to the younger generations. These are jobs that'll keep kids in New Mexico that are really excited to work in this type of an industry and don't need to leave the state to do so. Additionally, it's estimated to produce almost $220 million of earnings for those employed in the construction fields, or about 26 bucks an hour. So these are well-paying jobs that are in an exciting and new industry. Additionally, on a higher level, you know, it has the potential to create, you know, $450 million in local economic benefits for the state. And that's not even including the increased tax revenue from having these projects and the general economic development associated with the program. We are in the process of performing a more specific and localized economic analysis with the University of New Mexico that will further quantify the impact that the community solar legislation that's going to be proposed next year will actually have on the state. So really excited to share those results with folks. So why do some farmers choose to do community solar? There are certainly a plethora of reasons, but I think some of the most important ones is it's a great diversification strategy. It enables you to have a cash crop that doesn't require water to farm, and it enables you to put maybe underutilized lands back into production and producing profits relatively quickly. And oftentimes the land leases pay more per acre than the crops that would have been grown on that same piece of land. And it gets you away from fluctuating commodity prices and weather patterns. So it really does create that stable, sustainable economic income that farmers would need to keep their farms in the family for years to come. Beyond that, it also helps generate energy for local communities. So you get to not only be the provider of the food for these communities, but the provider of their energy as well. And you avoid selling your land into more intrusive forms of development, like strip malls, subdivisions, or things that can't be easily removed when their useful life is over. Here's some examples of how community solar can really integrate with existing farm operations. Again, it can be quickly remediated and put back into use, but even during use, you can have agrovoltaics, which would be kind of this picture over here, where you can see the crops really integrated in with the solar array, and the solar array actually providing needing shade for those crops. You can have beekeeping and pollinator-friendly type habitats, where you can not only help maybe a local beekeeper, but help the pollination on your farm continue in a strong way. Or you can continue to graze particular types of animals on the land. You might have your solar developer, elevate the modules just enough so that sheep or cows can graze right underneath them in the midst of also creating that clean energy. I wanted to take a second to walk you through the typical life cycle of a community solar facility from a farmer or landowner's perspective. I'll note that there is certainly a lot more that goes into this process, but these are the things that you would expect to see and experience through your journey with community solar. So we'll start with pre-development. And I'll start off by noting that this could be starting today. Some of you may have been approached by solar developers who are getting excited about this pending legislation and looking to get land deals or land lease options. So would not be surprised if some or many of you have already heard from these types of folks. But in this phase, you can expect to have an initial contact with the developer. Oftentimes, this will be accompanied by a site visit to take a look at the piece of land that's in consideration. And then you move into negotiating a lease option or a letter of intent. A lot of times we would recommend that you maybe seek counsel from an experienced real estate attorney if this isn't something that you're comfortable with. But at the end of the day, you just need to be comfortable with the terms and the amount of money that they're offering you for your land. From there, you would move into the actual development. You'll notice that it says it could take from 6 months to several years. There are a lot of things that go into that. And this isn't necessarily them being on your land. This isn't an active construction site. This is really a lot of pre-work to that. But the payment or payments for the site control rates would start at this point in time. So you would start receiving immediate revenue based on your lease option or letter of intent. And then this also allows the developers to provide some initial project diligence. So you might see a surveyor, they might do some title reporting, they might do some soils analysis or environmental impact analysis. So you'll see a couple of folks across your land, but certainly not very many. Moving on from there is where you actually start to see a lot of real development on your property. The solar plant is being built during the construction phase. This can take 3 to 12 months, but most typically it's more in the 3 to 6 months range. At the same time, the utility would be building out its electrical infrastructure to the site to enable it to interconnect with the grid. From there, you'd move on to operations. At this point, you're getting consistent ongoing lease payments per your lease agreement, and you're also may see periodic site maintenance by the system owner. So you basically have no responsibility to the system, and you're able to sit back and collect your lease or rent payments. At the end of the useful operation of the PV plant, it can be decommissioned, and this can take as little as 3 months. This will remove all above and below ground equipment. And the land is effectively returned to its original condition, so it can be put immediately back into its original farming use. I'd also like to highlight that we've garnered support from similar farm bureaus across the United States. Farm bureaus in Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and New Jersey have signed on with us, and we have worked very closely with them in both getting the enabling legislation passed in a way that works great for their states and their farmers, as well as working with them to create land lease best practices so that everyone's on a fair, equitable, and level playing field. Speaking of which, we're still working with the Farm Bureau of Maryland and expect them to kind of officially partner with us in the near future. So ultimately why we're here is because we need your help. We need the support of the New Mexico Farm and Livestock Bureau to ensure that we get this legislation to the finish line. We hope that you're able to support us throughout our efforts at the Capitol to ensure that we're able to create a sustainable and long-term program that works great for farmers, works great for New Mexico, and supports the clean energy transition. If you would like to lend your voice, we're looking for supporters on our Solution New Mexico site, which is led by our local coalition pushing forward with this effort. Certainly encourage you to take a look at that website if you'd like to learn more about our particular efforts. That will be launching with a press release likely sometime next week. By working together to develop the bill, the program, and the best practices, we will be able to have a program that will work best for you, the farmers, and enable you to create and benefit the most from this type of program. And with that, I think we can open it up for questions.
Do you guys have any questions for us?
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Kevin and Matt, we did have a question come in through the function, and individuals are interested in knowing, do we still need community solar legislation in place if the ETA has already passed in New Mexico and contains provisions and mandates for the adoption of solar and other renewable technologies?
Yeah, I certainly see a place for community solar. And I think there's a great opportunity for community solar to not detract from the ETA, but to support the ETA and enable folks to get there in a cost-effective way that's equitable to all New Mexicans and gives people the ability to benefit from the clean energy transition. These are opportunities for smaller local landowners to have projects on their land, as opposed to massive utility scale projects going in on state or federal land, benefiting maybe one major national developer, benefiting the shareholders of P&M, and benefiting that one single landowner. Community solar, conversely, has the opportunity to benefit dozens, if not hundreds of landowners and members of the community.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. All the ETA does is mandate that there needs to be renewable energy. It doesn't mandate how we get there. And that is on the state and stakeholders just like you all to determine how you get there. And I think what we're saying is that there's a place, we believe there's a place for small scale community solar projects as part of that mix when we look at how we get to those mandates.
Hey, Kevin and Matt, can I ask a question? I'm just curious. You know, we have an ag land classification for land tax purposes here in New Mexico, and I'm just curious what that would do for that classification. I'm assuming that it would take that portion of that land out of that classification, but maybe you can clarify that.
You know, I'd have to take a look at that particular rule or statute to see how it's framed. A lot of times, if you're able to co-locate farming, either through agrovoltaics or continuing to allow animals to graze on the land, you may be able to keep the agricultural designation. If you're not, then a lot of times the developer would subdivide out the portion of the property that the solar array is on, and then they would take on the additional tax burden of moving away from an agricultural designation to an industrial designation. So that's all encompassed in the lease rate and is fully borne by the developer.
Okay.
And then a lot of times it would pretty easily switch back once the system is removed and return to its original condition. And that enables for them to move back to an agricultural designation as well.
Kevin and Matt, one last question. What is the potential for a community solar garden in an extremely rural area, and what are the logistics behind that? Are there any challenges if you put one of these in a super rural area in connecting, or is it kind of the same wherever you are in the state?
That's a great question. There are certainly some considerations as far as being, you know, somewhat near to utility infrastructure. Utility infrastructure is fairly expensive, so to run a line very far away from existing infrastructure is usually cost prohibitive. However, a lot of rural areas have access to electricity and therefore have access to utility infrastructure. And so another, bonus or benefit of community solar is that these developers are paying to reinforce these sections of the grid. And so that can not only lead to more reliable energy for the farmers in these rural areas, it also allows them to expand their operations without needing to upgrade that infrastructure themselves. So if they were looking at a big infrastructure upgrade on their farm, they can certainly piggyback on these electrical infrastructure upgrades that the developers are paying for.
Yeah, and what we see in many of the states that enable community solar is there's a tremendous amount of development in rural communities, and I think that's one of the reasons why there's such an appeal to community solar, because when we talk about access to all customers, we're not just talking about maybe low to moderate income customers, we're talking about rural customers as well. So it really does sort of spread the wealth and distributes the opportunity to a lot of rural areas.
And then, as Matt noted before, anybody with an electric bill in the state can essentially benefit so long as the rules are right. So even if you're not necessarily able to host a solar garden, you could be a subscriber and financially benefit from the bill savings that you receive.
Matt and Kevin, we had another question come in. As a homeowner, what are the average savings that one can expect from participating in a community solar program?
I'll handle that one, Kevin, and maybe you can jump in. It varies from state to state. It sort of depends on what the legislation says and what the value of those megawatts end up being. But typically, what we find is that customers will save 10 to 15% on their utility bills each month. So if you're paying $100, you can expect that to go down about $15 when you subscribe to a community solar bill. And so what they'll do is, depending on how much you subscribe to, you get a credit on your bill. So if you could fully offset your entire bill, or you could offset a portion of that bill. It's your choice. It really puts the choice in the customer.
One last question. The proposed legislation that you all are looking to push during the upcoming legislative session, is that allow for voluntary participation in community solar gardens, or is this mandating communities to put these in place?
Purely voluntary. It's a matter of members within the community wanting to support these types of projects and receive the associated savings on their bill. If there aren't customers in a particular area that want to subscribe, then the project's likely not to move forward.
We've done a number of studies in new markets, and obviously there's a little bit of an education barrier to community solar, just making people understand what it is. But what we found is that when we explain community solar, generally in every market, no matter what it is, blue state, red state, rural, urban, about 80% of customers say they want to sign up for a community solar project. So we end up, when you explain it to people, we get a lot of demand. But like Kevin said, this is about energy choice. This is about creating more options for how people buy their electricity.
And that is all of the questions that we received. Thank you, gentlemen, for addressing those for us.
Not a problem. I guess,
yeah, our pleasure.
Do you or Chad have any other questions?
Have you guys, have you all polled any of the communities to see where the demand is in terms for community solar participation right now? Like, do you have any idea as to where some proposed sites could go in?
It really comes down to how the legislation is drafted. And there's one actually very critical piece, which is some of the siting restrictions. And so we've been very much advocating for very flexible siting locations to allow for kind of maximum flexibility and maximum participation. But other markets have constrained community solar and their subscribers to needing to be within the same county or an adjacent county. A lot of times, if a market goes that route, you see a lot of the development surrounding some of the larger metro areas. For New Mexico, it'd be like Santa Fe, Las Cruces, and Albuquerque. But a lot of those states have actually since moved to release those restrictions, which really enabled much greater ability for rural parts of the states to participate and host these types of projects. So, I think that's one element where we would really, appreciate support from y'all's organization in ensuring that we have maximum flexibility to provide maximum benefit to the maximum number of landowners and subscribers. It's a good question, though. Thanks.
So community solar, would you guys be the owner and operator of these community solar projects, or is that, how does that trend, what does that look like?
So we represent about 66 member companies that are mostly developers. So those would be the companies that come in, do the diligence, figure out how to put the projects, get the financing together and stuff like that, find the subscribers. A lot of times they'll hire local workforce to do almost all of the engineering and the work on site, and certainly all the construction work. And then there are, times where a developer is able to keep a project and become the long-term owner. And there are other situations where they'll sell it to a long-term asset owner, but usually continue to maintain the subscription practices so that the customers have a consistent person to work with. But CCSA, or the Coalition for Community Solar Access, does not actually develop projects on our own.
We did get one more question in. In our area, oil companies own power lines going through various properties. How would you approach using their power lines?
I guess I would be interested to learn more about how that ownership structure works. It does happen occasionally, but a lot of times there's some sort of utility backstop to some of those ownerships. So it's something that we'd certainly need to dig into further. But many times you can reach an agreement either directly with that oil and gas company or potentially with the utility that's serving them that electricity. It would ultimately need to be interconnected back to one of the utilities, because that's who's going to perform the billing operation to get the credits from the solar array to the subscribing customers.
And that's essentially what that's why we need legislative action, is to mandate that interconnection, essentially.
So would you guys be regulated by the PRC?
The program would be, the developers tend not to be regulated, and so that's really the other reason for legislation. So in order to sell electricity to more than one customer, you need to become a regulated utility under current New Mexico law. So that's, at the end of the day, really what we're trying to change.
Gotcha.
But there is still oversight by the PRC on the program as a whole, consumer protections, and that's something that's being discussed in the legislative working group as we speak.
Well, very good. Tiffany, any other questions come through?
No, sir.
Well, Kevin and Matt, we certainly appreciate you guys for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedules to give this presentation. Want to thank our members again for attending. Would also encourage you guys to mark your calendars for our next webinar on November 11th, where we are hosting Steve Lurch, founder and president of Story Arc Consulting. As a past CEO of Google, Steve is going to share how to utilize digital tools and strategies to understand and reach your desired audience. So mark your calendars and hope we'll see you all there. Matt, Kevin, thank you once again. It's been very, very informative. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks all. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. You all too. Bye-bye.